Hey everyone, welcome to the Real Estate Rookie Podcast. I'm Ashley Kerr and I'm here with Tony J. Robinson.
And welcome to the Real Estate Rookie Podcast, where every week, 3 times a week, we bring you the inspiration, motivation, and stories you need to hear to kickstart your investing journey. Now, we're joined today by Jean Augustin, who is in the military and started investing in real estate just 3 years ago while making only $40,000 a year. Now, he utilized different real estate investing strategies to stay competitive in this market, including short-term rental arbitrage. Now, he believes that with the high interest rates, calculated moves are even more vital than ever. So today, we're going to learn the benefits of using a VA loan, when to adjust your real estate investing strategy, and what short-term rental arbitrage is and how you can get started. So Jean, welcome to the show, brother.
All right, thank you guys so much, Ashley and Tony. I'm so excited to be on the show, ready for the conversation, and can't wait to give a lot of knowledge and value to the listeners.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. Do you want to start off with telling us a little bit about the beginning of your investing journey and what strategy did you actually pick when you first started out?
So going to the beginning of my real estate investment journey, it really, like the mindset or the interest of investing in real estate really started back in 2019. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. I just re-enlisted for a 4-year contract, and that contract gave me a $22,000 bonus. With that bonus, I was like, how am I going to make this money work for me or make this bonus work for me? How is the best way to properly utilize it so that way I'm not just buying a brand new car and 4 years of my life is just shows in a new car. So upon re-enlisting, I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. Upon arrival in 2020, I was on a deployment to Germany, where I met a few good leaders, in particular Morgan and Theo. They really encouraged me to start looking at the bigger picture. I'm a soldier. We always have one thing on mind, and that's the mission. But they kept telling me that I have to make sure that I set myself up for success, because the Army is great, but the Army isn't forever. So make sure you do something that is going to benefit you and your family. So they really encouraged me to start looking into real estate, looking at what growing generational wealth can be. And when they said that, it really stuck with me. So throughout the whole time during the deployment, I was looking at real estate. That's when I was introduced to BiggerPockets. I started watching David Green, Brandon Turner, watching the Real Estate Rookie podcast. And the more I was engaged in seeking the knowledge, the more I was like, I think I could possibly do this. So coming back from the deployment back in August of 2020, I came back. I hadn't really used any of my bonus money. I just let it sit there, save. I invested in some stocks, but a majority of it was still handy. So coming back from the deployment, it was the peak time because interest rates were at a record lows. Competition was high, but I was like, you know what? This is my chance. I've built my credit well. I've been in service. I'm not irresponsible. So I trusted myself to be able to utilize this and purchase my first property. Where we live, especially in the military, there's always soldiers coming in and out of the area. So there's a very solid rental market. So that's why I went to pursue purchasing a long-term rental, just due to the fact that soldiers, they're going to be here for a minimum 2 to 3 years. So that steady income, that stable market, I was like, this is where I have to jump in.
Yeah, I'm really curious as to how you identified that market. What are the things that you looked for and what made you feel confident that was the best market to jump into? But before we even get into that, I thank you very much for your service, first of all. And what do you think makes you different compared to somebody who would go and below that $22,000? For example, my business partner, the same exact thing. When he left the military, he got that bonus and blew it right away and has, nothing, probably at the bar, who knows, but didn't, invest it or save it. What are some tips you have for maybe someone who's just finding bigger pockets, maybe thinking about using their money wisely? What made you different than my business partner?
So for me, I think everyone is different. Everyone has the ability to do it. It's just my background and my environment pretty much instilled discipline in me to show that even though I may not come from the best circumstances, I don't have to make those circumstances my lifestyle. Like, just because my upbringing wasn't the best, I'm not around very financially literate people. I wasn't financially literate myself. I'm not wealthy. I don't come from a wealthy background. So just letting people know that you don't have to come from to be able to know that you still need to do something for yourself. Like, always put yourself first, take care of yourself, because in the end, it's honestly you against everybody. Yes, you're going to have your family, you're going to have your friends, but what are you going to do to set yourself up for success? So keeping that mindset in mind, I was just like, man, this is the most amount of money that I've seen in my entire life. Like, after taxes, I think it was like 17 or 18 grand just hitting my account right away.
Sitting there.
Yeah, just sitting there. And I was just like, wow, this is different.
It's a life-changing moment, right? But Jean, I think, because I want to get into the first deal, but, you mentioned something I think is super important about like not letting your previous circumstances dictate your future outcomes. And I'll tell a quick story. And I don't know if it's a fable or whatever it is, and I've heard it many times from different places, but there's a story of these two twins who both grew up with an alcoholic father. And as they became adults themselves, one person followed in his father's footsteps and became an alcoholic himself. The other person never touched a single drop of alcohol. And when people would ask them, well, why are you the way that you are? They both said the same thing. That they said, look at my dad. How could you expect me to be anything different? So it's all about, we can all receive the same input, but how you respond and the in-between is what makes the biggest difference. So I love to hear you say, hey, I'm not going to let that define me. It's all about what I'm doing moving forward. So tell us about that first deal, right? So you get this big chunk of cash. You've been educating yourself. You got these mentors in your life that are pushing you towards real estate investing, but walk us through the mechanics of what that first deal actually looked like.
So coming back from the deployment, I applied for a pre-approval loan. I found a lender, and it was just a matter of finding how far do I want to be away from base and how close do I want to be? Because in my experience, the dual stations that I've been to for training, the nearby communities, they're not like the best, right? But the farther you go out away from the best, they tend to get better, but they also tend to get more expensive. So as I was looking in my local area, I looked at 4 different properties. I kept getting overbid. People were moving from California to New York, so there was a lot of competition. And while I was doing my searches, it was nothing but duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes. I didn't want any single family just due to the fact that with the VA loan, you're allowed to use it for 1 to 4 units. So I'm trying to get the most bang for my buck. So that's why I looked for duplexes. I found one. It was priced at $205,000. I put an offer at $210,000 just to stay competitive. The appraisal came back at $215,000. It was pretty much a turnkey property. It was built in 2004, so there was very little upkeep. It was just for me to make sure I kept the maintenance over time. So I didn't have to put any money down.
John, did you find that on the MLS? That deal?
Yes, it was one of the properties that was on the MLS that my realtor found. It wasn't on Zillow or Realtor, but it was one of those that were in the pipeline to be on the MLS listing.
A pocket listing.
Yes, a pocket listing.
One of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. So he found it. It was a little outside of my comfort just because it was farther away than I thought I wanted to, but after that, I was like, if people can drive 30, 40 minutes from this installation to make it work, then I can do the same for 1, building that generational wealth, and 2, getting an asset under my belt.
So maybe let's just take a quick second to explain pocket listing. Ashley, I know this is one of your favorite things. So maybe define it for the rookies that aren't familiar with that phrase.
Yeah. So a pocket listing is when an agent is approached by somebody to sell their house. Before the agent actually inputs all the data about the property on the MLS and lists it live where other agents can see it. You can see it on Zillow or Realtor.com. the agent will say, you know what, I actually already have somebody that I know. So in my circumstance, my agent was listing a house for someone else, came and approached me and said, hey, I have this property. They're about to list it on the MLS. Do you want to maybe put an offer in first, see what they want for it? And I got the deal that way. They never even listed it. We agreed on a price that worked for me, that worked for them. Another way that it can be done, a second one that I had done for a pocket listing was another agent in the office. So the agent had been approached by a seller to sell property. That agent went to the broker's office where all the other agents are and said, here's this property that I'm about to list. Does anyone have a buyer before I list it? And agents came and toured the property, and my agent was one, and she said, I have somebody that will buy it. And I came in and I made my offer that way. A great advantage is you're not competing against a lot of other people. The one property, there was no one else looking at it. The other one, there was one other agent with a buyer looking at it. So I do like it because of that standpoint. So John, was that kind of your situation too, where you didn't really have to compete with a lot of people?
When the realtor presented to me, I think there's probably one person bidding on it as well. But going through the process of purchasing a home or just looking for a property, I was really into the BiggerPockets tools. So it wasn't until I found the rentalizer tool on BiggerPockets that showed me that the average rent in that area was anywhere from $1,100 to $1,400 a month, but the landlord had the rent at $800. So I'm like, oh no, this is a great opportunity. I cannot let this slip away. Just due to the fact that I know right off the bat I can raise the rent because it's already under the average rent for the area. So seeing that I purchased it, and I already knew what I wanted to do with it. There was one tenant in there already paying $800 a month, and they had about 6 or 7 months left on their lease. And the tenant on the other side, side B, their lease was going to be up during like the month of closing. So it just lined up perfectly. I'm like, I took it as a sign like, man, if you don't get this, you're going to miss out on this great opportunity. And one thing that I've learned over time, just doing my research, if you get an opportunity, take it and figure it out from there.
So I want to take a quick break real quick. When we get back, we're going to finish this deal and get more information on it and see how it finished out for you. But let's hear a word from our show sponsors. Okay, and we are back from a short break. Thank you so much, everyone, for checking out our show sponsors, just like you, that make this show happen. So now that you've got this property, this duplex, kind of tell us the final numbers as to where you ended up with this property.
Okay, so final numbers, property, I purchased it at $210,000, zero down due to the VA loan. I had a 2.75 interest rate.
Wow.
Those were the time. Yeah.
Those days, the memories.
Yes, those were the good days. So after closing, I moved into the property. One of my fellow, one of the soldiers that I work with, one of my buddies, he recently was allowed to stay off the installation. So I rented out one of the rooms in the duplex on side B where I was staying for $700. The tenants that were there, they still had their lease. They were up to like $800 a month. I raised the rent to $1,120. So that was about together $18,000 annually just off income off the property. The mortgage was around $1,200, almost $1,300. So out of pocket, I didn't have to really pay the mortgage, but cash flow wise, after I paid the property management, I had $500-$600 to myself. That was after mortgage was paid, after I put money aside for maintenance and expenses, and after I paid my bills.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid first deal, Jean. And I just want to highlight you because you really did like a double house hack, right? Because you were renting out the other side, but then you said you also rented a room within the side that you were staying in. So you were kind of double dipping. And I always joke, our friend Craig Curlop, who wrote the house hacking book for BiggerPockets, he did something similar with his first property, but he took it to like the 10th degree where he rented out every single room and he was sleeping on the couch so he could get the most amount of money from his property. But Jean, I want to go back because you mentioned property management. So it sounds like you hired a third party property manager to help manage the other tenants. I guess what drove that decision as opposed to self-managing?
What drove that decision was the fact that I knew that I was new to investing and I wanted to give myself the most amount of time or the ability to learn as much as possible without giving away a lot of money. So the property management, they've been in the area for 10, 15 years already, so they are very credible. And they've already been managing properties in that area prior to me purchasing it. And they were only charging 10% of gross income. And because I knew the amount of money that I would make with the rental income, I wasn't really stressing over the 10% because I know I would make that more over time anyways. And just the fact that I'm a soldier and there's not always a time where I can conveniently go and fix something for the property or go check on the tenants due to the fact that sometimes I'm on 24-hour shift. Sometimes I'm in the field for 3-4 days at a time. I knew for the circumstance in my situation, the most responsible thing would be to have someone manage it. I oversee it and make sure everything is done right. So that way I don't run into any troubles with my profession.
John, real quick, I want to ask you about the VA loan that you used on this property. Can you briefly explain the process of a VA loan, who is eligible for it, and maybe even if you have any advice on like, here's what you need to know before you go and get a VA loan?
So the VA loan is a mortgage loan from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Active duty soldiers can use it, veterans can use it. As long as a soldier has had at least 90 days during wartime and 181 days of consecutive service during peacetime. The VA loan is 0% down. There's no PMI. There's no prepayment penalties. So it's very convenient for soldiers that are looking to purchase a home. If you have been dishonorably discharged, you don't qualify. But if you have a general or an honorable discharge, you qualify for the VA loan. What's great about the VA loan is that soldiers can assume other VA loans. So let's say there's soldiers that are looking for a property. Current owner has a VA loan, and they bought it at like a 3.5% interest rate. And they're purchasing it right now. They can assume that rate using their VA benefits without having to get the high rates right now.
Jean, you let me know when you're ready to sell your property so that my business partner can assume your 2.75%
loan. You use the VA loan for one property, then you use it again for a different property. So are you able to have multiple VA loans open at one time, or how did you navigate being able to use it on two different properties?
So I'll start by saying with the VA loan, when you're using it, you have to stay a minimum of 12 months in that property prior to you either selling it or refinancing it or pretty much moving out of the property. So you are able to have more than one VA loan going on at a time. One is going to depend on your debt to income ratio, and it's also going to depend on the purchasing power that you have. So if soldiers or veterans, they will go and get their certificate of eligibility. It will let them know the purchasing power that they have. Depending on the region or where they may be, it may be higher or lower. For my area, I have a max of, I believe, like 700,000 or 800,000 of VA loan purchasing power that I can use. I have used 200,000 of it, so I still have about 500,000-600,000 left. And it's the same for my wife. So as long as you don't use up what's allotted, you're able to use the VA loan more than once, as long as you make sure you abide by the 12-month, because you can get to a lot of trouble. Don't do the wrong thing. Don't compromise your integrity, but you are able to have more than one going at once. And let's say if I only had 200,000 left, and left in my purchasing power, but my wife, she still had $300,000 and we're looking to purchase like a $600,000 home, we can combine it on a joint borrowership and we will still be able to qualify for that loan.
That's super interesting. I always got confused as to how that actually worked out. And I think you did a great job explaining that as to how you can do multiple VA loans, because there's so many times you will see, especially on the internet, where it says like, no, you only can do one, just like an FHA loan, and you have to refinance out of it and to get a next one. So thank you. I think that was a great explanation of the actual power of doing the VA loans, of how you can use it strategically.
Yeah, strategically and correctly. You don't want to break any laws. You don't want to have to lie. The VA loan allows you a very low barrier to entry into the real estate game. And that's why I'm so appreciative of it.
And I just want to add, because I know not everyone listening is going to be a veteran or active duty, but there are other loan products out there that are somewhat similar to the VA loan in terms of zero down payment. And we've had a few guests on the show, but Nancy Rodriguez, some of you may know her from Love is Blind, but she used the NACA loan. And it's Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America. So if you guys go to NACA.org, it's a nonprofit that offers zero down payment loans to everyone, to the general public. And their interest rates are typically a little bit lower than the prevailing rates as well. So if you're a VA, if you're active duty, obviously the VA loan is a great option. But if you're just a regular person and you want to identify a similar loan product, that NACA loan is one that works pretty well. So Jean, your first deal, really solid base hit, right? You're living for free pretty much, which is, most people's biggest expense. So let's fast forward a little bit. I guess what does the portfolio look like today? What kind of deals have you done since that first one?
So due to the fact that I had to make sure I maintained that 12-month, after I purchased a duplex, my wife, she purchased a single family, and then we house hacked this one. During that time, that was when interest rates were rising. And then that's when we shifted to Airbnb Arbitrage. It was actually right after going to the conference for the STR Summit with the Real Estate Robinsons, where I was like, you know what? I've gained a lot of knowledge. I've gained confidence. I think I can step into this route due to the fact that with the way that the prices of homes were increasing in my area, there's no way I can get in and still make money and not spread myself thin. Like there were duplexes that I purchased or that I saw that were in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. And a year later, they were at $450,000, almost $500,000. And the rents didn't go up to match the mortgage in the area. So once we saw that, we decided that we needed to shift. We couldn't just stick with the long-term rentals. We had to use an asset class that had the ability to produce more cash flow so that way we can in turn reinvest back into our portfolio. That's when I spoke with one of my buddies who was recently retiring out of the military. He wanted to sell his home. And right after the summit, I'm like, no, there has to be a way that I can capitalize on the knowledge and the relationship that I have with my buddy. So we negotiated. I convince them like, hey, don't sell it. You have an asset. Don't let go of your asset. It's appreciating, especially in the area. There's Meta moving into the city. The Gigafactory is about an hour away. Samsung is like 45 minutes away. So there's a lot of businesses moving to Texas that are going to cause these properties and cause a lot of people to start moving in the area. So after doing my research, looking at the possible occupancy rate, looking at what we can charge, I presented to him like, hey, this is what we can do with your property. I will give you what you want with this, the fair market rent for your area because you're entitled to that. But allow me to use it as a short-term rental so that way I have an asset and I'm taking care of your property. We have the relationship so you know that your property is going to be taken care of. There's no one more better to be a tenant than myself just because of the business that I will be doing out of the property. I will make sure that the house is upkeep because I have guests coming in. I want them to have a great experience. So like you can't beat this offer. So he agreed.
You'll be the best tenant, right?
I'll be the best tenant, right? So that's why we decided to move forward in that direction. And ever since then, it's been great. I will say being my first short-term rental arbitrage deal, we did not receive the revenue that we thought we would, but it was still great to get in there, learn the process, learn the ins and outs of what we want to do or what we can do, and have skin in the game to be able to have a baseline of, okay, we know what to do, now where do we go from here?
How do we improve it, right? How do we iterate and get a little bit better on it? And Jean, I want to define rental arbitrage for our listeners who may not be familiar with that phrase, but I think everyone understands the basic premise of a traditional short-term rental where you buy a home, you put it up on Airbnb, you welcome in guests, and you collect the rent payments, and then you pay your mortgage, and you get to keep what's left over. Rental arbitrage is somewhat similar, but as opposed to going out and actually purchasing a property where your name is on the deed, your name is on the mortgage, you're making mortgage payments, instead you go to a landlord and you rent their property. So you sign a lease with this landlord, but instead of you moving in yourself, you sublease that same unit or that same property onto Airbnb. And then you get to keep the difference between your rent payment, your expenses, and the revenue that's collected. So it's a more cost-effective way to get into the short-term rental industry, because you don't have to worry about a down payment. It's just like, maybe a deposit and first and last. So, Jean, I want to get into, kind of what this transition has looked like for you. And you said that maybe the expectations weren't quite what you were looking for. So I want to hear what maybe you feel like you missed. But before we do that, we're going to take one quick ad break so we can hear from today's show sponsors. And then we'll be right back here with Jean. All right, Jean, welcome back, man. So you made this transition into rental arbitrage, but you briefly mentioned that you learned some lessons, but it wasn't quite what you were expecting. I think you said the occupancy. So maybe walk us through, what were those expectations going into it, and what actually ended up happening?
So from my research, using AirDNA and Price Labs, it was showing that the occupancy rate was about 56% annually, and we can charge anywhere from 150 to 180 in that market. And that's where we started, and we're like, all right, okay, great. Let's list it. We purchased all our furniture. Our listing is live. And then going to month one, there wasn't that much, coming in. Month two, it was increasing, but not as much. Come to find that during our whole time of running the short-term rental, instead of being at a 56% occupancy rate, we were more at like a 32 or 35. Instead of being able to charge a 150, 160, we were only getting like at 118 to 125. So that really impacted our profit margin, and especially when it came to repaying the debt that we use to be able to fully furnish, pay for internet, pay for the monthly rent that we had to give to the landlord.
Jen, where did you get your initial data from that you were using for the occupancy, for the daily rate? And what do you think went wrong with that data?
I was using AirDNA, and I also purchased like this little mentorship of people that did short-term rentals. That's what I was using, but going back to the STR Summit, I learned that is just like scratching the surface of doing an analysis. You have to go more in depth. You have to see what your competition is doing. And when the surprising thing is, we were doing pretty good. We got superhost status. We got guest favorite, but the traffic in the area, it just was not what we predicted.
Yeah, and Tony, maybe you can touch on that a little bit too, just for our listeners, of how even though the data off of these websites can show something, the short-term rental market can change either by seasonality or just people aren't traveling as much, things like that can impact your occupancy and daily rate.
3 quick things that I'll say on that piece, Sean. I think first, like the sites like AirDNA, they give you revenue estimates of potential properties. All you have to do is plug in the address. And like you mentioned, I think that is just scratching the surface. And I always try and encourage folks to dig a little bit deeper and try and pull their own data for what they project for average daily rate and occupancy based on what the overall market is doing, based on what comparable properties are doing. That way you have a few more data points than just a revenue estimator. But actually, I think you touched on 2 really important points. That seasonality does play a big part of this. Like, Jean, it could be that you guys maybe launched this listing during the slow months, right? Like if you launch a short-term rental in the Smoky Mountains in January, you're going to have a very different initial experience than if you launch it in June, right? Like busy season is June and July. So the time that you launch it could play a role, because when we look at occupancy, it's looking over the entire 12-month window, not just a month or two. But the second point you brought up, Ash, which is a great one as well, is, travel demand can change and shift in certain markets. And, we have seen some markets across the country that have seen revenues kind of come down year over year. There are others that have seen revenues go up and some stay stable. So there's a lot of different factors at play, but it's just trying to get the full picture before you jump into it.
Another question I have about that, Tony, is what about like your competition? If all of a sudden everybody's saying like, oh, short-term rentals in this market, can that play a major role too? Is all of a sudden there's this huge influx of short-term rental properties in a market?
Yeah, 100%. And it's something that's happened in many markets across the country. I talk about Josh Tree a lot because we invest there, and that's one of those markets that saw a huge increase in supply. Demand was still increasing, right? You still see demand growing. The number of nights that are getting booked have grown year over year, but the rate of increase of supply outpaced the rate of increase of demand. So what does that mean? In order to stay competitive, you've got to find ways to level up the properties that you do have. And, that's what we've been doing for our portfolio in that market, is reinvesting capital back into those same properties to make sure that we can compete with this increased level of supply.
Now, John, you decided to look at a different strategy, and this was medium-term rentals. So kind of give us a little bit of insight of what made you even discover this strategy and what you did to actually implement it into the property.
Yes. So even initially going into the deal with with my friend and the arbitrage, I was already looking at a way to offset the months that were not being used. So even going into the deal, I was like, we may not see the returns that we want to, but there has to be a way for us to make money without losing the property or completely stopping the short-term rental. So luckily, there is a big hospital that has a lot of traveling nurses in our area. So I'm like, you know what? Let's list it on Airbnb, Vrbo, and let's list it on Furnish Finder. When I was looking at the property listings in Furnish Finder, there was a lot of properties there. And the ranges for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 3-bedroom, 1-bath was anywhere from 2,000 to like 2,800, depending on the size of the property. So we fell right in that median. So once we saw that the returns were not what we wanted or were not what we predicted in the short-term route, we paused, and then we were able to get someone to rent out the property on a month-to-month basis with at least a 30 or 60 day notice prior to them canceling the lease. So that way we had more predictability on the income coming into the property. So on the Airbnb side or short-term rental side, we were making approximately like $1,500 to $1,700 a month. And I think March and April was our busiest month. But switching from that to being able to charge $2,500 right off the bat for a midterm, I was like, yeah, that's already like almost $1,000 difference right there.
So you found the right strategy. Yeah. But Jean, I think what's instructive for the folks that are listening is that you didn't just say, oh man, well, this doesn't work. Like, let's just cut our losses and walk away from it. But you did the extra work to say, well, it's not this doesn't work, but it's just like, how can we approach this from a different angle? And I think that's a really, really important lesson for every single person. Doesn't matter if you're doing short-term, midterm, long-term, flipping, wholesaling. Like there's a lot of times different ways you can execute the same deal. So, Ash, I'm just curious for you, like, across the deals that you've done, can you remember any where you stepped into it with one kind of game plan in mind, but as you started to make progress, you're like, holy crap, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And you got to kind of pivot to something else.
Yeah, I can think of several actually. So one is kind of the same, going from short-term rental to midterm rental. We did that with a short-term rental arbitrage. So it was an apartment unit we were renting. And at first it was a short-term rental. Then we listed it as a midterm rental and started doing way better as that. But now what we do is we actually have it as a midterm rental. And then if we have a month or two of vacancy before the next midterm tenant comes in, we'll put it on Airbnb for short periods of time and we'll fill it with short-term rentals in the meantime too. So that's worked really well for us, is being flexible in that manner, and more of our property manager for those short-term rentals for having to deal with that and making sure that the windows are open correctly, things like that. And then the other property was one that we actually decided to have my business partner move into, because we were going to rehab it and rent it out. And that's when interest rates started to increase. And instead, so he moved into it as his primary residence, got a great interest rate on it for it at that time compared to what we would have gotten if it was an investment property. So we definitely have had to pivot. And I want to stress how important it is that when you go and look at a property to purchase it, that you can envision how you would be able to exit that property, or to, kind of pivot your strategies. Is it doable? So for example, I have a friend who bought in Denver, and he bought a 3-unit that was going to be short-term rentals, not knowing the short-term rental laws and that you could only do 30 days or more. You couldn't do 30 days or less. And they had to pivot to doing midterm rentals. They didn't know that at the time, but just going into the property, knowing all the laws and regulations, what can and cannot be done in that property too, before you actually go and purchase it. So you do know all your options and have some kind of strategy in place.
Even though I mainly spoke about the VA loan and how I utilized it, one thing that I would love the listeners to remember is that you are getting, whether you're using a VA loan, a FHA loan, once you are getting into the real estate game or investing in real estate, always remember that there's always different ways to skin the cat, right? So just because one way is working for me, that doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way that you should go about it. Just because something is popular or something seems very interesting right now, that doesn't mean that's the only way for you to get in investing in real estate. Just find out what you're good at, what you're wanting to do, what your goal is for your future, and make sure that whatever hurdles you may face along the way, just tell yourself that, hey, I'm going to overcome this because I know what my goal is and what I want to achieve with this asset or while I'm investing.
John, that's great advice. And what a great way to kind of wrap up the end of this episode, as to, letting everyone know that if you really want something, you're going to work for it and you're going to make it happen. And there are different things that you can implement, in your strategy to really have those options available. So it's not as hard of a road as it needs to be if you kind of have some pre-planning in place when you're going through it. So John, thank you so much for joining us on this week's Real Estate Rookie episode. If you want to learn more about John, we will link his information into the show notes, and you can reach out to him, find out more about his stories or any questions that you may have.
No, I just want to say thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story and share some knowledge, and hopefully I gave some value to the listeners. I've been a long-time fan, so I'm very happy that I was able to come on this platform and share everything that I know. And one last thing I'll keep with for the listeners is always be true to yourself. If you're going to look for financial freedom, don't forget to move with a sense of purpose. It's not always about what the money can do for you, but what you can do with your money. So always have a goal, always strive to achieve that goal, and never sell yourself short.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you on and taking the time to share your knowledge. I'm Ashley and he's Tony. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Real Estate Rookie Podcast.
This BiggerPockets podcast is produced by Daniel Zarati, edited by Exodus Media, copywriting by Calico Content.
I'm Ashley, he's Tony, and you have been listening to Real Estate Rookie.
And if you want to be a guest on a BiggerPockets show, apply at BiggerPockets.com/guest.